We're very honored today to have the 61st Speaker of the House of Representatives as our special guest, John Boehner. As Speaker of the House, he is second in line to succeed the President, and it's obviously, therefore, one of the most important jobs in our government, but he got to this position from very humble roots. He grew up in the Cincinnati area and has 11 siblings, 12 children in the family, 2-bedroom home, 1 bathroom. Yes. He was a football player in high school and played for the legendary Jerry Faust, who coached the Muller High School team. Later, he coached Notre Dame. Then John Boehner, after graduating from high school, went to Xavier University and worked his way through the school. After doing so, he went into the business world, joined a small packaging company, and eventually rose up to be president of the company. While he was doing that, he got involved in civic affairs. He was elected to the Board of Trustees of his local township, Union Township in Butler County in Ohio, and later was elected in 1985 to the House of Representatives in Ohio. In 1990, he was elected to the House of Representatives in the United States and has now been reelected 10 consecutive terms. As a member of the House leadership, he's had many different positions. He has served as chairman of the House Republican Conference. He has served as chairman of the House Education Committee. He has served as minority leader and as majority leader, and now, as I mentioned, 61st Speaker of the House of Representatives. We're very honored to have as our guest today John Boehner. Thank you.
Well, David, thank you, and I want to thank the members of the board and all of your honored guests that are here today. Thank you for the opportunity to be here to talk to you about jobs and the state of our nation's economy. Listen, we all know the economy stalled, and it's been stalled. And it's not because the American people lost their way. It's because their government has let them down. Last week, the President set forth a new set of proposals, and the House is going to consider them as the American people should expect. Some of the President's proposals, I think, offer an opportunity for common ground. But let's be honest with ourselves. The President's proposals are a poor substitute for the pro-growth policies that are needed to remove barriers to job creation in America. The policies that are needed to put America back to work. If we want job growth, we need to recognize who really creates jobs in America, and it's the private sector. This building is named in memory of former President Ronald Reagan, who recognized that private sector job creators are at the heart of our economy, and they always have been. That's the America that I was raised in. I think a lot of you know my grandfather were small business people. They ran a tavern in Cincinnati, Ohio that my grandfather started back in the 30s. I worked in that tavern growing up. A lot of things you can learn working in a bar. Tell you more about that later. But listen, I ran a small business myself. And I was 25 years old and went to work for a guy, and he passed away, and I suddenly found myself in a small business where I had one real live customer, and I was hanging on, trying to succeed. But I know what it means to meet a payroll, to hire people, and to create jobs in the private sector. And here in Washington, there's a fundamental misunderstanding of the economy, and it's led to an awful lot of bad decisions. And the reality is that employers will hire if they've got the right incentives. But the incentives have to outweigh the costs. As an example, businesses aren't going to hire someone because the government's going to give them a $4,000 tax credit if the government mandates that are imposed on them cost a lot more than that temporary credit. And in recent years, these mandates have been overwhelming. Private sector job creators of all sizes have been pummeled by decisions being made right here in Washington. They've been slammed by uncertainty from the constant threat of new taxes, out-of-control spending, and unnecessary regulation from a government that's always micromanaging, meddling, and manipulating. They've been hurt by government ideas that offer short-term gimmicks rather than fundamental reforms that will encourage long-term economic growth. They've been hampered by a government that offers confusion to entrepreneurs and job creators when there needs to be clarity. They've been undercut by a government that favors crony capitalism and businesses deemed to be too big to fail over the small banks and small businesses that are at the heart of our economy. And they've been antagonized by a government that favors bureaucrats over market-based solutions. They've been demoralized by a government that causes despair when what we really need is to provide reassurance and inspire hope in our economy. And my worry is that even after all of this, much of the talk in Washington right now is basically about more of the same. More initiatives that seem to have more to do with the next election than the next generation. It's these economic decisions that are being made here ought to be made to help liberate our economy. And I think the American people are worried about all of this as I am. I can tell you the American people, private sector job creators, they're rattled by what they've seen out of this town over the last few years. And my worry is that the American job creators, is that all the uncertainty is turning to fear, and that this toxic environment for job creation may be a permanent one. Job creators in America basically are on strike. And the problem is not confusion about the policies, it's the policies themselves. And the anger many Americans have been feeling in recent years is beginning to turn to fear, and it's fear of our future. That bothers me, and frankly, I think it should bother all of us. America is a land of opportunity, and it always has been. And our economy has been built on opportunity, on entrepreneurs, innovators, risk takers, willing to take a chance because they're confident if they work hard, they've got a chance to succeed. And over the past few years, governments made people less confident, not more confident that they can succeed. More and more Americans are realizing this, and they're speaking out about it. The last 6 weeks or so, I've traveled through my district and across the country listening to people outside of Washington who are the key to making America work. My message today on their behalf is this. This isn't that hard. What we need to do is liberate the economy from the shackles of Washington. Let our economy grow. I think we need to trust in the good judgment of the American people. You know, the instinct of government always is this: to get bigger, more meddlesome, more intrusive. And that instinct is at direct odds with what is needed to make the American economy move. Job creation in America is facing what I would call a triple threat from our government. And I think the first aspect of that threat is excessive regulation. During the joint session last week, I hosted about a dozen job creators from the private sector as guests in the House gallery, all of them with a common story. They're trying to help create more American jobs, but in each case, the government is getting in their way. And we all know some regulations are needed. We've got a responsibility under the Constitution to regulate interstate commerce. There are reasonable regulations that protect our children and keep our environment clean. Well, then there are excessive regulations that unnecessarily increase the cost for consumers and small businesses. And those excessive regulations are making it harder for our economy to create jobs. Over the past couple of months, we've seen two vivid illustrations. Last month, agents raided the Gibson Guitar Factory in Tennessee. Gibson, a well-respected American company that employs thousands of people. And the company's cost as a result of the raid are an estimated $2 to $3 million. Why? Because Gibson bought wood overseas to make guitars in America. The other example is in South Carolina, where the Boeing company recently completed a plant that will create thousands of new full-time jobs for American workers, only to be sued by a federal agency that wants to shut it down. Now, let me make sure I've got this right. American companies are free to go create jobs in China, but they aren't free to create jobs in South Carolina. You know, at this moment, the administration has 219 rules in the works that will cost the American economy at least $100 million each. This means under the current Washington agenda, our economy is poised to take a hit from the government of at least $100 million, at least 219 times. And I think it's reasonable to ask, is it wise to be doing all of this right now? The current regulatory burden coming out of Washington far exceeds the government's constitutional mandate, and it's hurting job creation in our country at a time when we can least afford it. Government's threat to job creation has two other components. One is the current tax code, which discourages investments and rewards special interest. It strikes me as odd that at a time when it's clear the tax code needs to be fundamentally reformed, the first instinct to come out of Washington is to come up with a new host of tax credits that make the tax code more complex. You know, and the final aspect is the spending binge that's been going on here in Washington. It's created a massive debt crisis that poses a direct threat to our country's ability to create jobs and to prosper. There are some people in this town who still deny this, who still deny that our debt is a threat to jobs. But if you talk to anybody outside of Washington who has to meet a payroll, they'll tell you that out-of-control spending in Washington is one of the things that concerns them most about our future. You know, back in May, I was in New York City, and I warned that if we didn't take action soon, the markets would take action for us. Well, last month, the markets took action in the form of a debt downgrade and the possibility of future downgrades that caused the markets to tumble. And it's going to keep happening until we, as a government, act. And the responsibility for fixing this toxic environment for job creation is a bipartisan one. The situation was created by Washington's inability to let our economy work. It was created by government intrusion and micromanagement. And I think we've got a responsibility to work together in the coming months to remove these barriers and to liberate our economy. This is what the American people are demanding of us. Everything we do in the weeks and months to come needs to start with asking this question. Are we addressing these problems, or are we making them worse? The Budget Control Act of 2011, signed into law just last month, establishes a joint select committee of Congress for the purpose of identifying $1.5 trillion of deficit reduction. Many have expressed their doubts about the Joint Committee's chances of success. Now, listen, I understand the skepticism. You know, a Joint Committee, after all, is no substitute for the President, who controls most of the arms of government. But I think the Select Committee has a huge opportunity. It has a chance to lay the foundation for economic growth by dealing with some of the obstacles that are standing in the way. The Joint Committee's mission is deficit reduction, and I think that has everything to do with job growth in our country. You know, as the co-chairman of the Joint Committee, Jeb Hensarling from Texas, said last week at the committee's first meeting, said this, he said, "Our debt threatens our jobs. Speak to any Fortune 500 CEO or small business person, it's clear that our debt hangs like the sword of Damocles over their hiring decisions. And it should be obvious that deficit reduction and a path to fiscal sustainability are themselves a jobs program." The Joint Select Committee can tackle tax reform, and it should. It's probably not realistic to think that the Joint Committee could rewrite the tax code by November 23rd, but it can certainly lay the groundwork for tax reform in the future that will enhance economic growth and enhance the environment for real economic growth in our country. The committee can develop principles for broad-based tax reform that will lower rates for individuals and corporations while closing deductions, credits, and special carve-outs in our tax code. Yes, the tax reform should include closing loopholes, not for the purposes of bringing more money to the government, but because it's the right thing to do and it's the fair thing to do. And if we're going to tackle tax reform, frankly, we ought to tackle all of it. Making short-term fixes in exchange for long-term flawed policy is not tax reform. And I think tax reform should deal with the whole code, both the personal side and the corporate side, and it should result in a code that is simpler and fairer for everyone. Now, tax increases, I think, are off the table, and I don't think they're a viable option for the Joint Committee. It's a very simple equation. Tax increases destroy jobs, and the Joint Committee is a jobs committee. Its mission is to reduce the deficit as threatening job creation in our country. And we should not make its task harder by asking it to do things that will make the environment for job creation in America even worse. And I hope the President will meet this standard when he puts forth his recommendations for the Joint Committee next week. And when it comes to producing savings to reach the $1.5 trillion target, the Joint Select Committee has really only one option: spending cuts and entitlement reform. The Joint Committee can achieve real deficit reduction by reforming entitlements and taking real action to preserve and strengthen Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. You know, there's this myth that spending reforms aren't real unless they happen this year, right now. Well, I think that myth is built on a very healthy skepticism that spending cuts made today aren't going to be implemented tomorrow. But it's a myth nonetheless, and I think we need to make sure that it doesn't stop us from doing what needs to be done. Most of the entitlement reforms that are in the House Republican budget were phased in over time. And that's just the way the Joint Committee should do them as well. Modest changes in spending programs today can have large effects tomorrow. Gimmicks, though, are unacceptable. You know, as I told the President's economic team during our debt limit negotiations, that we just weren't going to do any gimmicks. Deficit reduction should be about shouldn't just be about quantity; it should be about quality. You know, $1 billion in imaginary savings from war spending that was never going to happen is not quite the same as $1 billion in savings that strengthens our entitlement programs. Still, there are many skeptics about the Joint Committee's ability to accomplish this mission, and frankly, I've expected it. There always are skeptics. There were a lot of skeptics last spring when I was in New York and said that we should have spending cuts that are larger than the increase in the debt limit increase that we gave the President. And guess what? It happened. And this too can happen. I think the Joint Committee can succeed, and frankly, it must succeed. And it can help lay the foundation for real economic growth and job creation in our country. And if it does its work correctly, addressing the structural problems in our entitlement programs that have put us in danger of more job-destroying downgrades and setting the stage for fundamental tax reform that will help support private investment. It will have begun, if it does all this, it will have begun to remove some of the biggest barriers to job creation that exist in our country today. As the Joint Committee does its work, there are a lot of other work in Washington that needs to be done. As I mentioned earlier, there are 219 major regulatory actions in the works by federal bureaucrats right now. We know 7 of them will have an economic impact of more than $1 billion. The biggest is an EPA rule that could have had an impact of as much as $90 billion. I think the President acted wisely by halting the implementation of that rule. And I would urge the White House to build on their actions by disclosing to the American people the cost estimates for the remaining 212 economically significant rules that it has planned. I would also urge the President to call a cabinet meeting and tell every member of his cabinet this: until further notice, I don't want anything that gets in the way of private sector job creation. And I want all of you to report back to me in a month on how well you've done. Listen, the President's cabinet, they're not doing their jobs if they're not constantly focused on removing impediments to job creation. And if they're not focused on that, they ought to be fired. You know, in the House for this fall, Majority Leader Cantor has put together a legislative schedule that reflects the concerns that we've heard from job creators across America about unnecessary federal regulations that are hampering our economy. Earlier, I mentioned the situation in South Carolina and Boeing. And so today, the House is working on a measure that would prevent the federal government from meddling in that situation and others. And the Senate needs to follow the House in passing this bill, and we need to send it to the President's desk. The National Labor Relations Board, that bill is just but one of a whole series of measures that we're working on this fall to reduce the burden of excessive regulation on job creators. We'll pass the REINS Act, which would require a congressional review for any regulation that has a major impact on our economy. House committees have identified dozens of job-crushing regulations that are keeping our economy from producing jobs. We'll repeal the 3% withholding rule, which serves as an effective tax increase on those who do business with our government. We'll stop excessive federal regulations that inhibit jobs in areas as varied as cement to farm dust. Oh yeah, I said farm dust. Ever been on a farm? You're going to have dust, but that doesn't mean the EPA doesn't want to regulate how much farm dust that you have. We'll work on other reforms, such as removing barriers to increase domestic energy production and removing barriers to trade, many of which are in the House GOP jobs agenda at jobs.gop.gov. The United States Senate needs to act too. The Senate can't sit idle on jobs in the budget. We've already passed an array of bills in the House to remove barriers to job creation, and those bills are piling up over in the Senate. And the Senate hasn't even produced a budget, but it must. There are a few other things I'd like to mention that we can do in the weeks and months ahead to free our economy and to bolster confidence amongst employers. One's very simple. Both parties can boost confidence and reassure job creators by being clear. There will be no shutdown of the federal government, and we are not willing to default on our debt. The United States will meet its obligations to its citizens and to its creditors. In Congress, I've been clear about these goals since the day I was elected Speaker, and we've been true to our word. Another thing we can do in this area would be in the area of transportation and infrastructure. I'm not opposed to responsible spending to repair and improve our infrastructure. But if we want to do it in a way that truly supports long-term economic growth and job creation, let's link the next highway bill to an expansion of American-made energy production. Removing some of the unnecessary government barriers that prevent our country from utilizing the vast energy resources that we have, and also creating millions of American jobs along the way. And I think there's a natural link between the two. As we develop new sources of American energy, we're going to need modern infrastructure to bring that energy to market. We can also boost confidence and reassure job creators by sending a balanced budget amendment to the states. One of the most important things we did in the Budget Control Act last month, in addition to requiring a vote in both houses of the Congress on a balanced budget amendment, was to establish real caps on spending. And these caps are designed to hold back the growth of government while our economy expands and creates jobs. And to ensure that those caps are set in stone, we should ratify a balanced budget amendment. And if the President truly wants to make a difference and change the dynamic here in Washington, he should announce his support for a balanced budget amendment and call on Congress to send one to the states without delay. And lastly, if we want to create a better environment for job creation, politicians of all stripes can leave the my way or the highway philosophy behind. The all or nothing workable or the all or nothing approach is just not a workable mindset if we're serious about getting our economy on its feet again. Our economy is facing a broad-based systemic crisis. And as such, it's going to require everyone coming to the table with their best ideas first and leaving their politics at the door. But the courage to listen to each other's critiques and questions. It means ending the name-calling, the yelling, the questioning of others' motives. Leadership is not about all that sense. It's about buckling down and getting to work. Thomas Edison once said that opportunity missed by most people is missed because it's dressed in overalls and it looks like work. Well, listen, we've got an opportunity in front of us. And the trick is to recognize it and to believe in it and to act on it. We know the challenges we face as a nation, and I think we have an opportunity and a chance to confront them. And if we put election year politics aside and focus on our work, we'll leave our country in a much better place. Listen, getting it done is going to require serious effort by both parties. And there are some in both parties who, frankly, would rather do nothing. They'd prefer to kind of sit this out and wait to be dealt a better hand down the road after the next election. You know, the old kicking the can down the road. Well, guess what? That's not what I was elected to do. And I know what the hand is that we've been dealt. And instead of ducking from the challenge, we need to rise to the occasion and liberate our economy from the shackles that this government has put on it. I'm ready. And I think for the sake of our country and our economy, I hope all of us are ready. I want to thank you for the opportunity to be here today, and I'll look forward to your questions. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you very much. When you were negotiating on the debt limit extension, did you ever have any doubt that an agreement would be reached, or did you ever fear that we might actually default?
No. I was born with a glass half full. If you weren't an optimist like me, you wouldn't be here. Right. But I always believed that we would be able to come to some type of an agreement. And I made it clear all year that not meeting our debt obligations was unacceptable.
The White House has said, and others have said, that there was an agreement at one point, a grand bargain between you and the president. Was there ever an agreement on a grand bargain, or not really?
No, unfortunately not. There was a lot of discussion about what could happen, what may happen. The president wanted more revenue. I told the president, listen, I'll put revenue on the table. And I thought we could get new revenue from a flatter, fairer tax code and a more efficient tax code. And so over 10 years, I thought there was about $800 billion worth of additional revenue that would be available. But I told the president I would only put it on the table as if he were willing to make fundamental changes in our entitlement programs. And unfortunately, we could never get the yes on those changes to the entitlement programs. And then the president decided he wanted more revenue, $400 billion more, which in my view were nothing more than tax increases. But I do think it's unfortunate that we were unable to come to an agreement, because it would have averted a lot of what in fact did happen.
Well, would you be in favor of resuming negotiations with the president to reach a grand bargain, or do you think the committee now is in charge of that effort?
Well, I think the committee is now charged with doing their work. And I frankly think it's hard to put Humpty Dumpty back together again.
So when you played golf with the president, it didn't result in your bonding with him, you would say, or not really?
Now, listen, the president and I have a very good relationship. We get along fine. But, you know, we come from two different worlds. You know, I come to this job as a small business person who felt that government was too big, spent too much, and was out of control. And I still look at myself as that same person. And the president comes from a different ideology. And while we have a good relationship, sometimes the conversations that we have would be like two groups of people from two different planets who barely understand each other. And I don't mean it in a derogatory way, but there is a reason why you have two major political parties with big disagreements.
Well, you mentioned your background earlier, and I mentioned it as well. And you grew up in very modest circumstances, as I mentioned. What is it like to have 11 brothers and sisters?
Chaos. The same thing I deal with every day. You know, I tell people all the lessons I learned growing up were the lessons I needed to do my job today. Grew up in a big family, have to learn to get along with each other, get things done as a family. I grew up, I played every team sport there ever was. And yes, my grandfather and my dad owned a bar, and I grew up there too. I mopped floors, I did dishes, waited tables, tended bar. And you know, you have to learn to deal with every jackass that walks in the door. Trust me, I need all the skills I learned growing up to do my job.
So you still have your hardworking tendency. I understand you still mow your own lawn back in Ohio. Is that true?
Well, it is true, but I have to acknowledge that obviously I'm not home all the time. And so on Monday, Labor Day, I cut the grass, and then I promptly sharpened the blade on the mower. I made sure that it had ample oil in it, because when I'm not there, my wife cuts the grass.
Okay. Let me ask you about sequestration a moment. Under the agreement that you've reached with the president and now the law, there will be sequestration if an agreement is not reached between among the committee. Do you think there's a real chance of sequestration, or do you think an agreement will be reached?
No, the idea of building this firewall behind the work of the Joint Committee is to make it so ugly that no one wants to go there. And it's ugly. And I'm not a great I'm a big believer in the committee process. But in order to get something accomplished, the Senate leaders especially wanted this joint committee. And it's established. It will work. And I think it will work because the leaders looked each other in the eye and made a commitment to help make it work. And so I am optimistic that the committee will be able to do its work.
Now, one way of solving problems, some people say, is you could pick up a lot of revenue just by eliminating the Bush tax cuts, which expire in 2012. Would you regard that as a tax increase, or your caucus regard it as a tax increase, or is that something just not on the table, the elimination of those tax cuts?
Well, it's interesting. The current tax policy of the United States and fee policy would generate almost $35 trillion worth of revenue over the next 10 years. That's the current policies that are in effect today. But the current law that is in effect would mean that revenues would be at about $39 trillion over the next 10 years. And that's because the law already assumes that the Bush tax cuts are gone. It assumes that increased taxes in the Affordable Care Act will go into effect. It assumes that the alternative minimum tax will be there in full effect. And so it's going to be very difficult for the committee to raise taxes, because they'd have to raise taxes beyond the $39 trillion. So this is all the Congressional Budget Office. Welcome to our world of how the government does accounting. But the law already assumes that those taxes, all of the Bush tax cuts, are going to be eliminated.
So if they were eliminated, the Republicans in the House would not regard that as a tax increase because they're going to be eliminated any
Well, I would call it a tax increase.
You would, okay.
Yeah.
So
when you raise somebody's taxes, it's a tax increase.
So okay, all right. So right. So on capital gains rate is now 15%. Would you see any possibility of that being raised in the near term?
I would not, because taxing capital is not going to help create jobs. It's going to hurt job creation. And I think a lot of people in this room remember when we had high capital gains taxes. And what it does, it inhibits the efficient flow of capital to where it's most needed. Now, that will not help our economy. It will not help create jobs.
Now, the president proposed a jobs bill in his speech to the Congress recently. Is that jobs bill going to be considered independent of the special committee, and does that jobs bill have any chance of passing?
Well, as I've said, I think there are some components of it where I think there might be some common ground between us. The Congressional Budget Office is doing their job of looking at the president's proposal, and I would expect that the committees in Congress would have hearings on that. I think it's too early to determine whether some of it ends up being the work of the Select Committee or whether we would do it separately.
So well, you've been Speaker now since the beginning of the year. Was the most difficult time in your term as speakership the debt limit extension? Is that when you had the greatest worries or concerns, or was that the most difficult period you faced?
Well, I don't really have many worries or concerns. Listen, I know that people have asked me, are you okay? Well, you know, like I was in the middle of some death road. I slept well every night. And I never worried about the outcome in this. I've been there, done that. I've done the stress thing before. It doesn't accomplish anything. I'm a pretty simple guy. I know why I'm there. I know what I'm trying to accomplish, and I'm just trying to find a way to get there. And I think there's a way to do my job where people can disagree without being disagreeable, where as much as the president and I can disagree about things, we really do have a very good relationship.
Now, when you were minority leader, you didn't have as much influence, obviously, as you do in the way the House operates as you do now.
Like almost none, right?
How have you changed the way the Speaker operates? Do you involve the Democrats more than you were involved? And how have you done your job differently than Speaker Pelosi did?
Well, I'll let others analyze Speaker Pelosi's speakership. I'm a big believer in allowing the House to work its will. You know, over the 20 years that I've been here, I've seen the process of bringing legislation to the floor get tighter and tighter and tighter and tighter, and to the point where the last couple of years, about 5 members decided what the beginning of the bill was going to look like, and the same 5 would decide what the end of the bill was going to look like, while 430 of us would stand on the sidelines. And I've always believed what I said in 1991 when I was a freshman member, what do we have to fear in allowing the House to work its will? So to the extent possible, I'm trying to get a more open process on the floor of the House. I want the committees to be the real working zones of the Congress where they've been bypassed too much over the last 20 years. The committees have a responsibility to do real work. And the other, there's a byproduct of all of this. It's a way on the committee level to get members to work together again. If a committee chairman knows his bill's got to come to the floor under a fairly open process, he or she's got to find a way to defend that bill and build bipartisan support from the ground up. And so I can tell you, so far, so good. Members on both sides of the aisle are very happy about the process. The majority leader has done a great job in reworking the schedule so that committees actually can meet, time devoted for the committees, that we're actually going to vote during the daylight hours, as opposed to spending half the night doing things in the dark. So far, so good, and I think members are very pleased. And
very often people want jobs, and then when they get them, they find out they're not as good as they thought. You wanted to be Speaker. Are you happy you have the job? Is it as different?
I'm happy that I got the job. People ask me, are you having fun? Hell no, I'm not having any fun. Somebody show me where the fun is. But I am glad I'm there. I went to Washington with a mission that I outlined earlier. I have an opportunity to lead a mission. You know, I came here because, not because I wanted to be a congressman. I came here to do something on behalf of my country. And I didn't want to be Speaker because I needed some fancy title. I wanted to be Speaker so that I could lead an effort on behalf of our country. And it's that mission that drives me every day, keeps me excited, keeps me engaged. But I like to accomplish my mission and get the hell out of here.
Well, but you're not thinking of leaving, though.
No, I'm not leaving. I'm not leaving.
But
everybody can just relax up on the hill, all right? They're probably all getting their resumes ready to send out. No, I'm not leaving anytime soon.
But if the Republican nominee for president, whoever that might be, you haven't picked anybody you support, and do you expect to support anybody before the convention? Or?
No. Okay. No. We got a lot of great candidates, and I love all of them. Well, some I might love more than others.
And if one of them said to you, you've done a great job as Speaker, we'd like you to be Vice President of the United States, be on the ticket, would you consider that, or you're...
You know, it's hard enough for me to go to funerals of people I know,
Right, okay.
much less people I don't know.
Okay. All right. All right.
You know, this doesn't always have to be boring, all right?
So, so today, right now, you would say the biggest challenge that the country has is solving the debt problem and the deficit problem. Is that what your main focus is, as well as job creation? Is that those twin things, deficit, debt, and job creation, are the main things you're worried about?
Those would be, that'd be right up near the top of the list.
And in terms of national security issues, do you have any views on whether our troops should be brought back sooner or not in Afghanistan, Iraq? Do you have any comments on foreign policy you'd like
You
to
know,
make?
I think our greatest national security issue is our unsustainable debt. And there are a lot of reasons why we have to deal with the debt, but trust me, the national security side of this is one of them. But when it comes to our national security, I think we've got to find a reasonable place working with the Iraqi government on what a level of troops need to be there. It's clear that the Iraqis are not in a position to be able to defend themselves. We have invested lives and our treasury in helping to build a democracy there. And we have obligations there, and we should not be precipitous and put at risk this fledgling democracy in the Middle East. In Afghanistan, it's a different mission. I think the president, by and large, is on the right path in terms of drawing down the extra troops that were put there. But let's all understand that the threat that we faced from radical jihadists, this threat is going to go on long after everyone in this room is gone. We're dealing with a group of people who are trying to right a wrong in their minds from 1,000 years ago. And having success in Afghanistan is critically important to the long-term future of our country, as difficult and as uncomfortable as it is.
Now, today, if the presidential election were held today, do you think your state, Ohio, would go for the president?
Well, you don't know what the presidential makeup is going to look like. You don't know who his opponent's going to be. You can't beat somebody with nobody. And, but I think the president would have a tough time in Ohio today.
And in your house, you've won a lot of seats last time, 60-some new seats. It is often said that these freshman members are difficult for you to control. Is that a fair statement or unfair?
Hey, I was a rabble-rousing freshman one time, 20 years ago. Some of them, you know, they come over and apologize to me for being difficult. And I get a chance to look at them and say, you have no idea what difficult really means. You know, our freshmen have not really been a big challenge. They've had a baptism of fire. There are 87 of them. 63 of them knocked off, you know, incumbent Democrat members. And whether it was the continuing resolution to fund our government after March the 9th, whether it was the budget, and then the debt limit increase. It's they've had a real baptism, but you know. But I've got some more senior members who, God bless them, you know, whatever I do is never good enough, and I understand that. I've been around this process. There's always some,
You know, you have
and they stir up some problems, and it's just to be expected.
coming from the modest circumstances you did, and you rose to be Speaker of the House. It's very impressive. But you're one of the few people who've also been a minority leader and majority leader, and then became Speaker. But one of the most amazing things to me in reading about your career is that you were in the House leadership and then you were out of the House leadership. How did you get back in the House leadership? How did you manage to go back and do that, which nobody else has ever really done, going out of the leadership and going back in?
You mean being thrown out of the leadership and then coming back? You know, I never took what happened in 1998 personally. You know, Newt decided to leave. They tried to go after the majority leader and the whip, and then I was the number 4 guy. I should have just raised the white flag. I mean, I decided when I walked out of that room and walked down the hall, I looked at my then chief of staff, who is now back as my chief of staff, and I told him that we're just going to work our way back. We're going to earn our way back. And I said, I'm never going to let the bastards see me sweat. I'm never going to let them see an ounce of disappointment on my face. I'm just going to let my work speak for itself. You know, everybody else has always left. You get thrown out of leadership, it's kind of embarrassing. But I stood on the House floor for a couple of years, and well, I wasn't happy. I didn't want to smile, but I just stood there and smiled, and decided to earn my way back.
Well, it worked out for you. What is your relationship with Mitch McConnell, the Republican leader in the Senate? How does that work out?
Well, while Mitch and I are really, we have very different personalities, we are very close friends. And we've worked together for about 4 years. And it's really the first time in decades and decades that you've had two leaders from the same political party in the House and Senate who've had a good relationship. And I frankly think it's been good for him. It's been good for us. We talk every couple of days. Our staff talk every day. And to the extent that we're on the same page, I frankly think it makes the process move a lot smoother.
Sometimes people say you be careful what you wish for because you might get it. If you had a Republican Senate and a Republican House and a Republican president, and you're the Speaker and a Republican president, is that going to be easy to do? Or you?
I told you I was born with a glass half full.
Okay, so you can.
Listen, every day you wake up, you get dealt a hand, like a hand of poker, and you got to play the cards you were dealt. And whether it was growing up, my business career, political career, you just got to play the hand that you're dealt. And it'd be nice to get dealt 5 aces every time, but it doesn't happen very often. And many times you wake up, you got a really bad hand. But you still have to play the hand. It's not like poker, you just can't throw it in. You've got to play the hand you're dealt. And I just try to be realistic about the hand that I was dealt and try to make lemonade out of lemons.
The process that you've set up in the Congress now to reach an agreement, the special committee, do you think it will reach an agreement before the deadline, or will go right up to the deadline? In other words, we won't really know what the process decision is until the day before. Is that likely to be the way things get done, or you just can't say?
Who knows? Now, this is Washington. Right. There are some things that just are going to be the way they are, which means that, you know, it's probably going to be closer to November 23rd than it's going to be to November 22nd.
So I have two final questions. Two final questions. Was there any regret that you have as Speaker, anything you would have done differently than the way you did it as Speaker, or are you pretty much happy with the way things have been handled?
I feel pretty good about it so far. I don't really have any regrets. I tried to move this deficit reduction bill early, but you know, some of my colleagues didn't want to go along, and so I had to sit down with a lot of the members and try to bring them along gently. And nobody on my staff's ever heard me scream. I don't do anger. You know, I'm not the big mean-fisted guy. I don't carry a whip around with me. So you know, I have to rely on just being straight up with people. Yeah, there were a couple of freshmen who had a couple of young whippersnappers who, you know, seemed to have all the answers. So I brought them in my office and closed the door, and I know these two pretty well, and I looked at them and I said, "Boys, that door's not going to open until you say yes. It's going to be 30 seconds, 30 minutes, doesn't matter. It could be 3 hours." Said, "I've got a week and a half's worth of cigarettes in that chest over there, so it'll still take about 45 minutes. But anyway, I'm not heavy-handed with my colleagues. And the other thing that I didn't realize until somebody pointed it out was that when you look at that big deficit reduction deal that we got passed, typically that would have cost the leadership $10 or $20 billion worth of goodies. A bridge here, money for a hospital here, But, you know, we got rid of earmarks. I've been here 20 years. I've never asked for one. I told my constituents in 1990 that if they thought my job was to come to Washington and rob the federal treasury on their behalf, they were voting for the wrong guy. And I had this crazy idea when I was running for majority leader in 2006 that if I could start a big fight over earmarks, that I could win this race for a majority leader. Well, I almost cut my own throat because I didn't realize everybody did earmarks. But earmarks, for the first time in our country's history, there'd be no earmarks in any of these bills this year. And so it made getting the big deal, it made getting the big deal harder, but I didn't quite realize it at the time that you had to sit down and just talk about the facts, and people couldn't hold you up.
So when you were a high school linebacker playing for a very famous coach, did you ever think you might be a college and professional athlete, and you didn't think you had those skills or aspirations?
No, that was way beyond, you know, this is a different era. This is back when, you know, we all played sports, and all my brothers played sports with me, but no. I always wanted to be a salesman. And you know, eventually that's what I did. I was in the sales and marketing business in the packaging and plastics industry. And I thought I was going to do that the rest of my life, but along the way I got involved in my neighborhood homeowners association.
Right.
And I ended up in the United States Congress. This too could happen to you.
Right. Well, I want to thank you very much for your time and your candid thoughts, and I appreciate your being here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Very good. Very good.